drawing was my first language, more so than writing or any other type of communication, or even speaking for that matter. I mean, that's, sounds weird, but it really was how I communicated to friends and students and so forth growing up. At first, I thought I was going to be a graphic designer in a sense to, monetize my art. But then early on, I met another student who just convinced me to go all in for fine art and not, even attempt to find work for my art. And so, moving to New York, I took on all kinds of crazy construction jobs with skills that I did not have, and worked, for Andy Warhol, Mick Jagger, Richard Gere, Bianca Jagger, all these different people through a contractor that was the contractor to the stars. At that point in time, the art world was smaller, that's for sure, and the way that you would get into it wasn't like the galleries were seeking artists in grad school. That just simply didn't happen like it has for decades now. But back then, you brought your slides around, or mainly really what happened was, and similar today in some respects, is that someone would have to, see your work and then kind of introduce you to a gallerist. It happened to me that Izar Patkin had his studio in the Lower East Side, and he introduced my work to Manuel Gonzalez, who was the director for Holly Solomon Gallery back in the late 80s, and that's where I had my first exhibition of sculpture, was at Holly Solomon Gallery on Fifth Avenue. It was a great start. It was a show that was like with Kim McConnell and Andy Warhol and myself, and I had the back project room and had a group of pretty cool, unusual leather sculptures. I was asked to teach art, which was a really kind of an interesting yet existential thing to do for a Yankee from Massachusetts to go down to Tennessee and teach in a southern environment. So I made a group of paintings down there that kind of took on the subject of the Gothic South, and right away I got a chance to exhibit those at Edward Thorp Gallery when I got back. But when I got back, this idea of having paintings of the South in New York City, it was, there was a necessary friction there. So, and I was also kind of overwhelmed by New York all over again. I had been living there for some time, but I got like really blown back by the sense of ever-present media and all that. So I was working again as an art handler at the Guggenheim Museum. And I remember carrying around Pollocks and Rothkos. I mean, literally carrying them around with couriers, nervously standing by and all that. And that kind of gave me the sense of what American scale really should be. Like paintings should be of a certain size, and they should dominate in a certain way. Even whether they're abstract or not, I wanted that sense. So even though I was living in a 12 by 12 foot apartment in the Lower East Side, I just started stretching up big canvases from one day to the next. And the first painting that I made was based on a book that was found on the street. That was a self-help book about what to do after the divorce, and one of the ideas was to put cold cream on your face, and so that image that's in that was in my first show was really the basis for how everything started, and there was no precedent for it. I eradicated the narrative of the early paintings, of the Southern paintings, and chose to choose a much more static, much more declarative, iconic image that didn't tell a story other than the psychology that was in the portrait. So, so that was the start. Eventually, I would say the first celebrity picture that I actually painted, it's hard to really know. It was Sharon Tate, and that was in that first show. But the painting, quite honestly, was so gnarled up and so roughly carried off that it would have been difficult for anyone to have imagined that it was Sharon Tate. Typically, I'd think more of, Rob Lowe in 1998, or the portrait of Jeff Koons's Michael Jackson sculpture from that same year. Yeah, the celebrity was always it was not about oh, they weren't like honorific portraits of celebrity. They were more about the kind of consequential element of celebrity where it's not so easy, or it has to do with their own personal lives being in direct conflict with their public persona. So those kinds of conflicts were the unspoken content of the work, even though you would have a beautiful portrait of the man, and we often think of my portraits of celebrities being women, but often they were men. And I did a portrait of George Harrison in 1999, albeit it was a portrait done in the pinch pot clay sculpture, and he looking like Jesus Christ. So there was always this kinds of filters that would distort and change the way that we received the notion of celebrity. The way that they're actually painted would be commonly associated to realism, and it's often termed as hyper-realism or photorealism. But in a way, they're not that at all. The realism of the images have to do with their subjects and have to do with a conceptual basis for the work more than they do for how they're carried out, and that's very important to me. So the style is a figurative, naturalistic style, but that can be applied to illustration. It can be applied to images of sculpture. There's really and it can be applied to a portrait of a piece of paper. That sense of being able to bring an object, the painting itself, into kind of vivid present. The most recent body of work that involved the notion of celebrity or fame was my last exhibition at Gagosian Gallery on 24th Street. Working with Lindsay Lohan, Sasha Grey, and Adriana Lima, each of which have risen to the heights of notoriety in their various fields, and have massive infrastructure in terms of their mediated presence. So I don't see it as the same anymore, because in a way, the choice to collaborate and their choice to actually work with me on those projects had a lot to do with more of an elliptical sense of how imagery and media works within and without of art. We were looking to create just the ultimate image of like Malibu experience, and with Lindsay in her most beautiful state, in this kind of fresh surfboard and a fantastic Cynthia Rowley wetsuit. We were just trying to create an image of California and of superstardom that kind of reached into the beyond, and it came together, and when we were standing there, we couldn't believe how epic and how iconic it looked, and we captured those images, and so when you see it in the film, she's holding the board, and then she just kind of settles into that pose, and her head turns and looks at the camera with the Celine sunglasses, and it hits just the way it ought to hit, when it's like that. And the painting, it was clear that moment was the moment that had to be held forever. So creating the short films or the photo shoots, sending those images out into the media, having them returned to me as placeholders for those external experiences, then again creating paintings of those images and presenting both the films and the paintings at the same time, created a relationship to cinematic image to painting that had previously not existed in my work, and it actually made our corporal presence within an exhibition, our sensitivity, and our experience, one of that it heightened that sense of being present, and in a mediated age where we're constantly sending pictures around and not seeing shows other than being online or however we're doing it, it really focused on the place. If we use our GPS or whatever, it was like there you are, and so it meant to focus on our relationship to those subjects and their lives and the portrayal of it in motion and in the static medium of paint.